It's Saturday morning. You're a couple days away from sending your kids back to school. Curious, how many times did they tell you that they were bored? And here's the next question. How many times did you bail them out when they were bored? How many times did you try to fix their boredom for them? How many times did you give them something to do? How many times did you try to take that discomfort away from them? Welcome back to this Saturday's Walk and Talk, where today we're going to talk about boredom. So the reason why I want to talk about boredom is because we've gotten to this place where we think boredom is something that we're supposed to fix. And I got to tell you, it's one of those things in school that absolutely, it drives kids nuts because they can't handle being bored. Drives teachers a little bit crazy because there's this apathy that takes over and kids don't have the perseverance or resiliency to just push forward into a place where they can actually get some work done. And they're in this place because we live in this world now where boredom has become this bad thing almost. It's become this place where we don't want our kids to sit and we feel like we need to be entertainers all the time, keeping them busy, giving them things to do, instead of letting them figure it out on their own. And that's why when we have kids in school who can't handle boredom, it gets hard for them and it gets hard for teachers because they just don't have the ability to push through into that place of curiosity anymore. And the hard part about it is that teachers are more creative than ever. I think I go back to when we were in school and, our teachers used to put things up on the overhead projector and they'd use their overhead pens and we'd have to take notes and stuff like that, or they would be writing on the chalkboard, sometimes throwing chalk at us if we weren't listening, and the chalk brushes. I know I can't be the only one who has been hit with the chalk brush, but anyways, back then, we took notes. We had to pay attention. We had to work. We were also living in a world where we weren't bailed out of our boredom. Our parents would not bail us out of boredom, ever. And so nowadays, you're in classes, teachers use video, they use graphics, they use manipulatives like hands-on tools. They're making sure that lessons are, no more than 20 to 30 minutes long at times, because we have this generation of kids who can't focus for more than 60 seconds at a time, or they can't focus if they're not being rewarded every 15 seconds like a video game does. Unfortunately, there's so many kids now, I would say a good chunk of kids, who will not get started on their work in class or even get started on chores at home unless you're standing right beside them, because they just don't have the motivation to do so. And a lot of that, again, is tied to boredom. And a lot of times parents will think that it's a learning problem or that my kid just doesn't get it, because I don't know how many times I've had kids, you ask them to read the instructions and they're simple. In a grade 5 class, you'll write the instructions at a grade 2 level. They're simplified. Like, we simplify work, but they just do not have the ability or the want to learn about what they're reading, or to take the directions and implement them, because their curiosity isn't there. Their imagination has depleted. And so this isn't a learning problem. This is a boredom tolerance problem. You're probably wondering where I'm at. I'm at my kid's place in Naramata. He lives in the middle of an orchard, so while he's going to college. Yeah, he got lucky. It's beautiful here. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it is so important for us to stop rescuing our kids when they get bored. In the last video, I had a conversation with Cole, and the topic of discomfort came up quite a bit. And it's really hard for us parents for some reason nowadays. Is we for some reason think that we're bad parents or we're not doing a very good job if our kids are feeling discomfort, and we don't like how it feels because it hurts our feelings. So we constantly jump in and bail them out. And it's the same thing when it comes to kids when they're bored. We don't like that feeling of when our kids are feeling bored. So we jump in, we bail them out, we rescue them from that feeling. And we do that far too often. We do that with so many feelings that are negative, that we bail kids out and we don't let them sit in that discomfort and let them learn from it. And it's something that we have to start doing, is we have to start letting our kids learn from it. Now, this is super important with boredom, because boredom leads to curiosity. And curiosity leads to exploration. And exploration leads to interest. And interest leads to passion. And there's no parent alive who doesn't want their kid to follow passion. And there's no parent alive who doesn't want their kids to follow their passion and to end up in a career or in a life that they love. A lot of people wake up in jobs they hate going to, and what we want as parents is we want our kids to have better than what we had. And so for us, it's super important, right? And I think that's part of the reason why we bail our kids out of their discomfort and those feelings, is because we want them to not suffer like we did. You know, we have to understand that every single time we rescue our kids from their boredom, you're actually doing them a disservice, because you're stealing their creativity. You're taking it away from them. You know, when kids sit there in that boredom, it makes their mind start to race. It makes them start to think about what they could be doing. Yet, you know, at first, it's going to be hard, because your kids are going to respond emotionally, because they're not going to like the feeling of boredom, and they're not going to like the fact that you haven't bailed them out. And so what's going to happen is you're going to see an uptick in their behavior. But at that point, you can't jump in. You just have to go through the couple hours or whatever it is. And I know it's hard of not bailing them out, because when you don't, eventually they're going to shift. Eventually, you're going to start seeing them looking around. Eventually, you're going to start seeing them pick something up. Eventually, you're going to start seeing them build something. And you're going to see it in their eyes. You're going to see their imagination working right before your eyes. It's a beautiful thing. And once that imagination starts working, and once their curiosity starts to develop, all of a sudden their ability to persevere through that boredom is going to matter, because they're building a boredom tolerance. And when you build boredom tolerance, you build frustration tolerance. And when you build frustration tolerance, you end up in a place where kids can be sitting in a desk with instructions, with work that they don't want to do, when they feel that frustration, and they'll work through it because they're tolerant to that frustration, if that makes sense. Now, the other thing I want to point out is, because I know some of you are watching this thinking, how do I do this cold turkey? Well, I'm not asking you to do this cold turkey, even though I kind of laid it out as you're doing it cold turkey. What I want you to go back to is some of those walk and talks that I've done that revolve around co-regulation. And all of them, every walk and talk I've had talks about co-regulation. And so it's just like anything. If you're having to teach your kids to learn how to be bored from scratch, or depending on where you are, some of you are a lot better at letting your kids be bored, go outside and figure it out and whatnot. You know, it all depends. But anyways, if you need to co-regulate your kids, where you need to kind of set them up, like, so for example, if a kid says he's bored, and you know what, you put some Play-Doh on the table and you walk away, or you send them outside with some sidewalk chalk, or some bubbles that they can blow, or a frisbee, or a kite. So what you're doing when you kind of co-regulate by providing them with the materials they need to not be bored, you sort of help them out, and you just step back, and you step back, and you step back, and you step back. And eventually what they're going to do is they're going to start playing with that stuff, and they'll be 20, 30 minutes in it, and they'll start looking for you. And then you might have to step back in, do a little more co-regulation, and you step back. And then the next day, you can take that same stuff. And if they say, I'm bored, you can say, hey, all that stuff you played with yesterday's sitting on the table, or it's in the driveway, or it's in the garage, go get it. Right? And then they'll go get it themselves. And, you know, that might take a day, might take 2 days, might take a week. But at the end of the day, what they learn is they learn how to find the things that they need to not be bored. So you co-regulate, and you co-regulate enough until you can see that light come on, that curiosity come on, where they're capable of doing things on their own. And then you just start pulling back. And then eventually what's going to happen is your kids are going to start grabbing things without asking. They're going to start running outside without asking. And you're going to have kids who are figuring out boredom. And it's funny, eventually what's going to happen is they're not going to want the sidewalk chalk. They're not going to want the bubbles. They're not going to want the kite. They're not going to want the Lego. And you know what's going to be crazy? Because I see it all the time on the playground at my school, because we do have 2 recesses and a lunch on purpose, so our kids can engage in developing those emotional regulation skills with their peers and their curiosities. What you're going to start seeing is rocks and sticks are going to become the best toys ever. I could tell you so many stories that involve rocks and sticks. With my boys, unfortunately, the rocks and sticks ends up being weapons, because they think they're fighting zombies. But you know what? That's good, because that's creativity too. And it's all about intent, right? But at the end of the day, when rocks and sticks become your kids' favorite toys, or playing in the dirt, or climbing up a hill, or climbing a tree, creating a lookout, wanting to build a fort, all of those things, that's when you know curiosity and imagination has taken over. And what you have to realize is that boredom is not a problem. Boredom is the pathway. Boredom is not the enemy. Boredom is the pathway to creativity, to curiosity, to exploration, to interests, and to developing passions. You know, and who does not want to have a life where you're not stuck behind a TV screen, or you're stuck behind a gaming console, and where you get to go and explore? Kids love to explore. Take so many of the things that I did when I was a kid with my buddies growing up at the Kenyon Alpine. You know, think back to when you were a kid and when your parents kicked you outside because we weren't allowed inside. And it was punishment. Remember? Remember when it was punishment for us to be inside? When we got grounded, we had to stay in our room. So, like I said, sticks and rocks need to become our kids' favorite toys. Boredom is not the enemy, it is the pathway. So, on that note, my friends, all the way from Naramata, peace out.